Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei miorei ha'esh. Shavua Tov, my holy brothers and sisters. Let me turn that off. How are you doing? It's a little late on a Saturday night, and it's fantastic that we're all together, and we're going to start this week to make it a good week, a Shavua Tov, a good vach, with a little bit of learning together here in our virtual classroom, AT Daily, going out across the country and around the world. Lately, we've had people here in our class, on our show, in from Ghana and Nigeria and Bangladesh and India and South Africa, and who knows who'll be with us tonight. It's fantastic that we're all learning together. Let us light up the darkness. Who's in the house tonight? And by the way, that was the Maccabees doing Havdalah, doing the Havdalah melody. I recorded that myself in 2014 at the Partners in Torah winter retreat. That was 2014 in Connecticut with the Maccabees. All right, who's with us tonight? Sandy McMurray says good evening. Paula Schmidt-Klauser says shalom from Chicago. Bill Eldridge says good evening from Berkeley. Shanuel McDowell is in from Michigan. Solo Anna Bangale sends flowers. Good morning from Houston, says James Nieto. Sharon Fran Brooks says Shavua Tov from Lebanon, New Jersey. Interesting variation on Debbie Friedman's Havdalah. Arnold Alban in the house from Northridge, California. Thank you for all this beautiful learning and Shavua Tov. Janice Beanstalk says Shavua Tov from Southern California. Melissa Eitel-Jurin, shalom from Great Neck, New York. Marie Wheeler, high on the top of the painted desert of the Navajo Nation in Arizona. Welcome. Patricia Bowers, I am in Waco, Texas, about 100 miles south of Dallas. Edgar Adolfo Martínez, saludos cordiales desde Guatemala. Bienvenido. Qué bueno tenerte aquí, Edgar. Bienvenido. Welcome, Edgar from Guatemala. Shan Ali is in from Pakistan. Welcome, Shan. It's great to have you with us. Is it Sean, perhaps? Bryna Bloomfield is sleepless in Massachusetts. Keith Feldman is in the house. Paul Adams says hello from Smyrna, Tennessee. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. How do you say Smyrna? Is it Smyrna? Let me know. Pauline Michael says Shavua Tov from Arkansas. Martina Hildegard from New Mexico. Steve Vernick from Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Tinta Margalit Handili says Shalom Boker Tov from Zambia. This is fantastic. Welcome, Tinta. Polly Boer says Polly's in from Nashville. Vanessa Ortega from Guatemala City. Two people from Guatemala. Shavua Tov. Rochelle Rosen, Shavua Tov from Modesto. Edward Kramer from Colombia. This is fantastic. Walusungo Gift Minkandiri says good morning from Cape Town, South Africa. And Jafar Ahmed says hello from Bangladesh. Truly an international learning together. This is wonderful. Just what it's all about. Our mission here at Accidental Talmudist is to share the wisdom of the Jews with the world. We've been nurturing this wisdom for 3,000 years on behalf of the whole world. And thank God we live in a time when it is safe to let the light shine forth. Let the light shine forth and to light up the nations. All right. We are on page 134. That's Daf Kuf Lamed Dalet. We're in of Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 19. Today we're finishing our discussion of the second Mishnah in chapter 19 and opening our discussion of the third Mishnah. Okay, our Mishnah concerns the necessities of an eighth-day circumcision. So recall that if a Jewish baby boy needs to be circumcised on the 8th day of his life. If the 8th day falls on Shabbos, then a procedure, which is basically an elective surgical procedure, it's not necessary medically speaking. Therefore, an elective medical procedure we would not do on Shabbos because it involves wounding the body. Any surgery wounds the body, and drawing blood. Both of these things are prohibited to do on Shabbos, so it's a desecration of Shabbos. But as we've seen, all our sages agree, a circumcision in its time on the 8th day overrides the prohibitions of Shabbos. If for some reason the circumcision had to be postponed and then it was going to be on another day, so we would do it as soon as the baby is healthy enough to have its circumcision, but now that it's not in its time on the 8th day, we would not override the restrictions of Shabbos, and we would wait for the first day that the baby is healthy and that it is not Shabbos. And this rule applies to the festival as well, as we shall see. So we were talking about that in the first Mishnah, we learned that Rabbi Eliezer would also permit the facilitators to the Mishnah. For example, if somebody had forgotten to bring the scalpel, so we would bring the scalpel even though it would involve carrying in the public domain and carrying in from the public domain to the private domain in a city where they don't have an Eruv, where that rule would be set aside because it had been handled already. But the rabbis prohibit. So the knife could have been brought to the place where the circumcision is going to be done. It should have been brought before Shabbos. If people forgot to do that, then they're going to have to delay the circumcision. So bringing the knife is understood as a facilitator to the circumcision. But here in the second Mishnah, we're talking about the necessities of the circumcision. And really what we're talking about is that after the circumcision has been performed, to protect the baby's health, we're going to do certain medical, first aid type of procedure. In other words, so that he just had a procedure, we're going to put some ointment on the wound and perhaps a bandage. And while those things might also require, in certain situations, desecrating the Shabbos, in other words, violating restrictions of the Shabbos, we would do them because otherwise the baby would be in danger. So anytime a life is at stake, of course, we override the rules of Shabbos. And these are considered the necessities of the circumcision, and those we do on Shabbos. Continuing that discussion, as we saw yesterday, in the ancient world where they didn't have the same kinds of antibiotics and antibacterial ointments that we have today, an herb, a spice that was used for that same purpose was cumin. So cumin, you would want it to be ground up. Cumin, I guess, is a seed, right? It's a spice that's made from a seed. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. And it needs to be ground up in order to be used in this medical way. So if it had not already been ground up before Shabbos, which would have been preferable, and now it's needed because the circumcision was performed and they realize they don't have the cumin there, so then what they would do is they would grind it, but they would do it in an atypical way. Whenever we have to desecrate Shabbos for whatever reason, at least if we can do it in an atypical way, it's better. So instead of grinding it in a mortar and pestle, one would grind it with his teeth. This is what we do on Shabbos. But on a festival, recall that a festival basically has the same rules and restrictions of Shabbos in terms of us refraining from doing the 39 prohibited labors of Shabbos. But on a festival, so we're talking about Passover, Sukkot, Shavuos, same rules apply for Rosh Hashanah as well. We are permitted to cook. We can prepare food, we can cook food on a festival. That's the main difference between a festival and Shabbos. So, since we can prepare food on a festival, we can grind the cumin to be used medically in this situation for an 8th day circumcision that was done on the festival. And I've been to a circumcision that happened on a festival. It was just last year. What was it? I think we had one during Sukkot. There's been a few. In this neighborhood, there's so many people having babies. And for sure you can go. And we had one on Rosh Hashanah as well, actually. We had one last year, 2nd day Rosh Hashanah. And so we override the festival. And in this case, you wouldn't have to grind the cumin with your teeth because you can prepare food on a festival, and so you can just grind the cumin. As we'll see, however, the rule that the rabbis imposed with respect to the facilitators of a circumcision apply in other areas as well. Meaning, if it can be done before Shabbos or before the festival, it must be done before. And so in terms of food preparation, even though we can prepare food, we can cook food, and we can do the things we need to do in order to cook our food on a festival, certain aspects of that food preparation could and should have been done before the festival. And we're going to take a look at that. So, for example, with respect to bread, and that's why the title of tonight's show is Fresh Bread is Always Better. So, fresh bread is always better. Therefore, on the holiday, you can knead the dough and bake it so that the bread was baked fresh right on the day and you have fresh bread out of the oven. It's much better. But what about making cheese, right? So if you're making cheese, if you're curdling the milk, that could have been done before the festival. One opinion says, well, fresh cheese is even better, so let's make it on the festival in the same way that we would make bread because fresh bread is better. But actually, the sages answer, cheese does not get better because it's fresher. In fact, if it ages a little, it's even better. So in terms of curdling the milk in order to make cheese, and here we're not talking about hard cheese, right? We're talking about the kind of soft cheese that is made pretty quickly. Still, it would have been better to make it before the festival. And so we make it before the festival. We don't make it on the festival. With respect to mustard seeds, now we're really in the ancient world, right? We have to think like in the ancient world. With respect to mustard seeds, so I don't know, maybe they didn't have mustard in a jar that you would buy at the store, and people would prepare their mustard and sort of strain their mustard seed at home. Now, one of the procedures for making the mustard, I guess they would take the mustard seed, which probably had already been softened or something. I don't know what the whole process was, but it was understood in their time and in their way of doing things that if you put a hot burning coal into the pile of mustard seed, it would acquire a better flavor. I think it would be sweetened. They call it sweetening the mustard seed with a hot coal. Now, the problem here is when you stick a wooden coal into the pile of mustard seed, you're going to extinguish the coal. And extinguishing is something that we don't do. Just like kindling a fire is prohibited on Shabbos, kindling a fire for a non-cooking reason would also be prohibited on a festival. And extinguishing is just like kindling. So in this case, because we're going to extinguish the coal, and we could have done it before the festival, and the mustard would be just as good if it was sweetened before the festival than on the festival, so then the sages say we do not sweeten mustard seed by sticking the burning wooden coal in it. A metal coal, apparently a piece of metal that was fired up super hot, could be used to sweeten the mustard seed because you would not be extinguishing it. It would simply cool off. That's not the same as a wooden coal that would be like a fire being extinguished. And also with regard to mustard seed, we learned that they also had a process of putting it through a mustard strainer. And this also could have been done before the festival, and so therefore is prohibited to do on the festival. Now, what's interesting about that is when you put the mustard seed through the strainer, you're not separating something edible from something inedible. That's the prohibited labor on Shabbos and festivals of selecting, right? Selecting is just one of those processes that we do not do. Basically, it means removing the edible from the inedible. In the case of passing these mustard seeds through the mustard strainer, we would be separating edible from edible, and so we're not actually violating that prohibition. However, it looks like selecting, and so on the same theory of the appearance of impropriety is something to be avoided, the rabbis prohibited that task. Now we come back to our Mishnah, and we've been talking about procedures necessary procedures associated with a circumcision, with the 8-day circumcision on Shabbos. And now, something quite lovely, we get some advice from Abaye's mother, the sage Abaye. He brings down a whole bunch of advice from his mother. And it's not his mom, it's his foster mother. I'm sorry I didn't look up his life story. I don't know if he was orphaned, but this was his nurse, right? So we know this. I guess if it was a foster mother, he probably lost his mother. I'm sorry I don't have the facts handy right now. But at any rate, he was very attached to her. And here in the Talmud, where we literally have thousands and thousands of rulings from our sages who are all men, and we don't hear a woman's voice that often. But here, Abaye is going to bring a whole list of teachings that he learned from his foster mother, from this nurse. I think she's probably also a midwife as well. And he wanted everybody to know these teachings that he learned from her because they were so important for saving lives. So, what did we learn here? From Abaye says, I learned from my mother that when making a bandage for a circumcision is very important. So what was a bandage to them? They didn't go to CVS and pick up Band-Aids that were perfectly cut and have the adhesive on the back and peel off the paper, etc. They were using strips of cloth that were usually torn from a larger cloth. And Abaye learned from his mother that kind of cloth is dangerous to be used after a circumcision because the little baby's member is so delicate. And these strips of cloth that you tear from another cloth have dangling threads. And those threads can become stuck because there's a little bit of blood and liquid there, and then it dries, and it can end up hurting the baby when the bandage is taken off. So she had a way to avoid that problem. You fold it over, you use a lining, you put the hem in the right place. The details don't matter that much, but she had a particular way of doing that. We would never use that now unless we were, well, who knows? If we were on a desert island and we had to perform a circumcision, we might do well to remember, don't let any threads come into contact, any loose threads come into contact with the area where the circumcision was done. We also learned from her, and there's a condition when a baby is born. It's obviously very rare, but it happens sometimes. It actually has a modern medical name, where the anus of the baby is covered with skin, and you actually can't see where the opening is, the rectal opening of the baby. In such a case, people back then would be tempted to locate it, feel around for it, and then make an incision with a metal instrument, with the same kind of knife that was used for the circumcision. And Abaye's mother said, you don't do that. What you do instead is you rub some oil on the skin, you hold the baby up in the sunlight, and then you will see exactly where the opening is. And then you make the incision not with a metal instrument, but by making a vertical cut and a horizontal cut with a barley corn. That using metal would create infection, but the barley corn would not. So this is the kind of thing that she learned, right, through experience, and it was an important procedure back then. If a baby refused to nurse from the mom, she said that often that happened because the baby's mouth was cold. And if you would just bring something really warm, like a hot coal in a cup, and just have it somewhere near the baby's face so that some heat went on the baby's face, then the muscles of the mouth would become, sort of able to operate, and then the baby would nurse. If a baby couldn't breathe, she said that you could take the afterbirth from the mom, the placenta, and place it on top of the baby, and that would often spur the baby to start breathing. And she observed that if a baby was too red, sometimes described as purple, or a baby was too pale, sometimes described as yellow or jaundiced, that baby, in either one of those two situations, is not ready for its circumcision on the 8th day. Those are the two situations where you delay the circumcision. And indeed, another sage, Rabbi Nosson, learned that lesson from Abaye that he got from his mother. And he was once sort of on the road in the coastal cities, and a woman came to him with a newborn and said, I had a baby boy, we circumcised him, and he died. I had another baby boy, we circumcised him, and he died. This is my third son. I don't want to lose him. Please help me. And he looked at the baby, and indeed, it had that coloration. It was red, kind of purplish. And he said, the blood is in its skin. It hasn't been absorbed into its body, just like Abaye's mother said. It's not ready to be circumcised. Wait until its coloration becomes normal. The lady waited, delayed the circumcision. The child lived, and they named it Nasan after the rabbi that gave that advice. And the same thing happened again in another place with a baby that was yellow to a woman that had lost 2 babies because they circumcised when the baby wasn't ready, when its blood had not entered, all the places that it needed to enter in the skin and the member, etc. They delayed the circumcision and the baby lived, and they named that baby Nasan after that rabbi as well. Okay, if you have questions and comments about that, please put them in the comments. Nina will feed them to me. I'm going to come back around to them shortly. Right now, we're going to open our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here of chapter 19. We're still talking about how a circumcision intersects with the restrictions of Shabbos. And now we're talking about, and it's funny because when we first started this, I hadn't read ahead, and I didn't remember from the last time I went through the whole Talmud. But I said, well, maybe boiling water is something that is a necessity, but I'm not sure. I just kind of mentioned that in passing. And then I talked instead about, well, you need a sharp knife. What if you have to sharpen the knife? That was just part of our earlier discussion. Here in Mishnah number 3, we're going to talk about that you heat up water to wash the baby. Now, this is very interesting because the law, as it's given in this Mishnah, and then as the sages in the Gemara discuss it afterward, was one way then, and it's different now. Okay, that's very important. So I'm going to just say that at the outset. The law has changed. It changed later after the Talmud was set down. It probably changed in the last 1,000 years. What changed? Maybe our technology, maybe the way that people live. Maybe humans have actually changed a little bit. Maybe just our medical understanding has changed. Back then, it was understood that a baby needed to be washed with warm water, before the circumcision, after the circumcision, on the day of the circumcision, possibly on the next day after the circumcision, probably, but I'll just say possibly on the second day, but for sure on the third day. And so the third day, even if the third day fell on a Shabbos, because it was understood that the baby would be in danger if it was not washed in warm water, they would desecrate Shabbos even on the third day after the circumcision in order to wash the baby in this warm water. And that was the law then. The law changed, and today we actually know that no, you can perform a circumcision and you don't have to give the baby a bath right afterwards. It can wait until after Shabbos if you feel you want to give the baby a bath, but it doesn't need to be bathed in warm water in order to protect it from the healing process after the circumcision. Again, these days we have antibiotic ointment and things like that, so it's really a non-issue. So that law has changed. We don't heat up water and wash a baby before or after a circumcision. That's the law today. But now let's go back to Talmudic times and the law as it was then. So the law as it was then, as the Mishnah says, we may wash the baby before the circumcision and after the circumcision, and we'll heat up water in order to do that. And we'll even do it on the third day afterward. What's unclear from the Mishnah is, how do we wash the baby? Does it mean that normal washing, that we would immerse the baby in some kind of a vessel, like a little baby tub? Or, because what it says is, and one will do it not with a vessel, but with one's hand. Like you would take hot water and sort of dribble it on the baby, right? You could take water in your hands and put it on the baby in order to wash it. And it's unclear whether the Mishnah is saying we do that on the third day, but on the first day we would just wash it, Or we do that from the first day, that we would wash it with a hand, meaning in an atypical manner. Since we're going to desecrate Shabbos, we're going to do something we normally wouldn't do on Shabbos, that we're going to do it in an atypical manner. Or if now that we need to wash the baby, we just wash the baby. But if it's on the third day, then we would do the atypical manner of washing with the hand rather than immersing it in some kind of a little baby tub. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you can just wash it, and even on the third day, you can wash it. But it's a little unclear what the Mishnah is saying, and now the sages afterward are going to debate what the Mishnah is saying. In terms of why the third day is important, so Elazar ben Azariah, who permits washing even on the third day, a full wash, he said his source for that is Genesis 34:25, which says, what's the exact words? And it came to pass on the third day when they were in pain. So I'm very aware of that verse. That is part of the Dinah story in chapter 34 of Genesis. And that story really played a part in my faith journey, right? Because, I grew up, I was just very casual about religion. I was bored by it. I went to Hebrew school, I had a bar mitzvah, and I was out. And I was just very unconnected. In college, I took a class called The Bible as Literature. It was a fantastic class. It was taught at Harvard. One of the professors was Robert Kiley, who was wonderful. He was the head of the English department at Harvard. And there were two other professors. I can't remember their names right now. But we read the Bible cover to cover the way we would read a novel, the way we would read any book in an English literature class. And now that I just read the whole Bible cover to cover, I was amazed. I was amazed by all these stories. I thought I knew something of the Bible. I mean, I went to Hebrew school for, 5 years or something. And, I was in youth group in high school. And, you live in the world. You think you've been exposed to a lot of Bible stories. But of course, there's many stories in the Bible that unless you read the Bible, you haven't heard. And this was one of them. And this was a particularly hard story to understand because, at least on the surface, it makes the Jews look bad. And here it is. This is the Bible. It's the origin tale of the Jewish people. And in this story, Jacob and his family have returned to the Holy Land after he was working for his father-in-law, Lavan, for many years, 20 years. And now he returns with his family, and he's got 12 sons and one daughter. And the daughter is Dinah, and she goes out in the land to kind of see what's going on. She takes a walk from the family encampment. And she wanted to, I think, meet other young, she was 12 brothers, one girl. She wanted to meet other girls her age. So she went out to sort of meet the people. And while she was out, she was very beautiful, very wealthy. And she caught the eye of the prince of Shechem. And a little unclear what happened, but basically he raped her. He saw her and he raped her. He took what he wanted, right? He then wanted to marry her. That doesn't change the fact that he raped her. But he then wanted to marry her. He went to his father, the ruler of Shechem, of the city-state of Shechem. He said, I want to marry her. They went together to see Jacob. Jacob found out what happened. He was furious. And they said, and the father said, my son wants to marry your daughter. You can settle in and live in this area. There's lots of land for your people and my people, and our daughters can marry your sons, and your daughters can marry our sons, and we can all be one people. Jacob didn't answer. He wanted to think about it. He waited for his sons to come in from their shepherding. When they heard that their sister had been raped, they said, this will not stand. They thought about it, and they came up with a plan. And they said, well, okay, we'll do it, but we are circumcised people, and no way can we intermingle with a people that is uncircumcised. So you all need to be circumcised if you want to do this. So this prince and his father were evidently great salesmen because they convinced all the men of their city. And granted, they were the rulers of the city, so they could get what they wanted. And they convinced all the men of the city to circumcise themselves so that they could intermingle with this new clan that had come into town. And on the third day, when all the men in the town were healing from their circumcision and were in great pain, that night, Shimon and Levi, the second and third oldest brothers of the 12 sons of Jacob, came in the night and executed every man in Shechem. And then the rest of the brothers came. And I mean, back then, this was just the way that war worked, in the sense what happened afterwards, that they took the women and children as slaves and the livestock, and they moved on and left a ghost town. Now, Jacob was furious that his daughter had been raped, but he was also furious at the way his sons had handled this situation. He said it was wrong, and he did not forgive Shimon and Levi for what they had done, and reminded them of it on his deathbed. So the answer of how could this story, why is this story in the Bible? How does this story make the Jews look good? Which is a question that haunted me for years. And I really wanted an answer to that question. And I'm going to teach my class now, not get into my whole personal story. But if you've heard me, I do a lot of public appearances. And when I tell the journey, my faith journey, this story figures prominently. And I was really looking for an answer to that question. And I would ask, anytime I had the opportunity to ask a rabbi, I asked an answer to that question. But really the answer is, it doesn't make the Jews look good. The Bible's purpose is not to make the Jews look good. It's to give an honest account of our journey in becoming a people. And we did many great things, and we did things that were not great at all. And this was one of them. Now, some will say, don't be so quick to criticize the patriarchs, because the fact is that was a lawless town. And they didn't have a system of justice, which is incumbent on all people around the world. And Shechem, in many ways, was operating like Sodom and Gomorrah, and where a rape like that did go unpunished and would continue to go unpunished. And so perhaps taking justice to the town and the men who allowed these things to happen was the correct thing to do. That's another point of view, but that's a discussion for another day. The bottom line is, here we have a biblical verse which says that the third day after a circumcision is a time when the person who had the procedure is in great pain and distress. And so we would violate Shabbos to wash if that was something that was needed to preserve that person's health. Again, if you're just joining us, the law has changed. We understand now that you don't need to bathe a baby that's had a circumcision, not on the day and not 3 days later. It's not necessary. It's not medically necessary. And so that doesn't override Shabbos. But as that procedure was understood in Talmudic times, nearly 2 millennia ago, it was necessary. And so they would violate Shabbos, not only on the day of the circumcision, but even 3 days later to wash the baby. Now, does the Mishnah mean that we wash only in that atypical manner with the hand, or that we immerse the baby on the day of, if the circumcision happens on Shabbos, but on the third day we would do it in that atypical manner of just pouring some water on the baby with our hand? So Rav Yehuda and Rabba Bar Avu say what it means is that you wash. Wait, let me get it right. They say, it means that this is a style of how. In other words, we can wash on Shabbos, but even on the first day, the day of the circumcision, we're going to do it in an atypical manner. So we would never immerse the baby in a little baby tub the way we'd normally wash the baby. We're only going to use our hand for the baby. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who disagreed, he says you can wash. But Rava says, no, you guys have misunderstood the Mishnah. What the Mishnah is saying is you can wash. You wash the baby on the first day, but then on the third day, when you still need to wash it, if that day falls on Shabbos, that's when you would do the atypical manner. And what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was saying is that even on the third day, you can fully wash it. So he kind of overruled his superiors. Rava had a different understanding than the sages who were a little older than him. And somebody came to Rava and said, we have this situation. Do we wash it just in a tub, or do we wash with our hand? Do we wash the baby with our hand? And he said, no, it means that you can wash it in a tub if it's on the day of the circumcision. So he gave that ruling. They followed his ruling. And then a few days later, he got sick. Or maybe even the same day. He fell down with it. He got ill. And so he said to himself, I was cavalier in overruling my superiors, like I know better. And now I'm getting sick as a punishment from heaven, because even though I had a good reason, I shouldn't have been so quick to overrule people who are older and perhaps wiser than I. And so that happened to Rava. But still, Rabbi Elazar said Rava was right, and the halacha, the law, is like Elazar ben Azariah, that one could wash the baby on the first day and even on the third day with the full washing. Again, this no longer applies because we understand that a baby doesn't need to be washed. It doesn't need to be bathed. Obviously, the area of the wound has to be cleaned and, anesthetized, or not anesthetized, but whatever you need to do, ointment, salve, antibiotic, the perfect instrument, whatever you need to do to keep the baby safe, we do. The baby just doesn't need to be bathed, and so we no longer bathe babies on Shabbos if the 8th day circumcision falls on Shabbos or on the festival. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me go to your comments and questions. Let me mention that tomorrow, Sunday, I would normally do this show at 6 p.m. Pacific. I'm going to be tied up in the late afternoon tomorrow, so we're going to do the Friday schedule tomorrow, Sunday, which is going to be noon Pacific. Okay. Christo Cheney says, other than learning from the accidental Talmudist every day, not many things are better than fresh bread. Thank you, Christo, and I agree with you. And may you all be blessed to one day walk into a house and smell bread baking as good as Nina's challah. I am really so thankful and so blessed that every Friday I smell her challah baking, and it's amazing. Lynn says, even the Yom Tov cooking has to be on a pre-existing flame. No, haven't been able to figure out how those of us with electric stoves can benefit from that option at all. Exactly. So when Nina's cooking on Yom Tov, on the festival, she's got an existing flame. Like there's going to be, like you can use a yard site candle just as a candle that will burn for the many hours of the festival, even a 2-day festival. And then we'll light the gas stove with that existing flame. And then, except in certain situations, that burner is going to be left on, low, but on. Because you don't extinguish when you don't need to extinguish. As for an electric burner, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I just don't know. You have to research that. I don't know the answer to that. Pauline Michael, in the previous daf, they mentioned removing the white spot of leprosy during circumcision. If leprosy is a spiritual malady, how does a newborn infant get it? Is it a spiritual problem of the parents? What a good question, Pauline. So right away, Pauline is showing she understands that what's normally translated as leprosy with regards to spiritual impurity in the Torah is not leprosy. It's not the disease of leprosy. It's tzara'as. Which, as I've mentioned many times, is a spiritual malady. So if a baby has on its member this white dot, the thing is, it's not tzara'as. It might be tzara'as, but it probably isn't, right? That you can have this white, if a person back then, when this malady still existed, when the temple stood and the whole nation was living on a higher spiritual plane, so if a white dot appeared, it might be tzara'as. And so you would bring a priest to see if that's what it was. And sometimes it was, and sometimes it wasn't. So if it appeared, and then the thing was, you couldn't cut it off, right? You can't just remove it so that, okay, well, it's not my problem anymore. I cut off that skin and now I don't have it, right? You still have to bring the priest, examine it, and see if you have tzara'as or not. But if it appears on the foreskin of the baby, I think it could be cut off, right? And that shows that there's a distinction. So, it's a great question. I don't see how, if it is a spiritual malady, it would appear on a baby. The only way is what you're saying. It would come from the parents. But I just don't remember having that thought as I was reading that part of it. And those laws were complicated. When they were talking about when that would happen, they were really, it's almost like a hypothetical. I'm not sure that it ever happened. But what they were saying is drawing the analogy, well, what could a priest do in order to be purified so that he could go into the temple? And they were really using the analogy of cutting off that white spot to help them try and understand if the circumcision would override Shabbos or not, if the facilitators would override Shabbos or the festival or not. It was just another one of the proofs that they went through, a really complicated set of proofs. But it's a great question, Pauline. And finally, Sharon Friend Brooks says, pilot lights on most gas stoves are pre-existing flames. Exactly. But not on our gas stove. We have one of those, it's called like a pico or pica or something like that. It's like it sparks to create the flame. It's a gas stove, but it doesn't have a pilot light. If you have the pilot light, you don't have a problem. You're there. You're ready to go. But our stove doesn't have that. All right, that's what I've got for us tonight. It's great to start the week off with you. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing, God willing, page 135, like I said, at noon Pacific. And it's going to be fascinating because now we're going to get into a discussion that in the Talmud, there's not just two genders. In fact, there are four. There's male, female, and then there's the one who has parts of both, called a hermaphrodite. And then there's one that has neither or is doubtful. And we're going to get a little bit into that discussion and how it intersects with the laws of circumcision. May you have a great sleep tonight, and I look forward to being with you, God willing, tomorrow. All the best, a good vach, and Shabbat.